Evening from London, and apologies for us being slightly late. We had some technical issues, and this week is election week, so it's a big week for for British people, of course, and especially for landlords who are keeping an eye on what's going to be able to help them with their business, but also renters. So we've been following the manifestos quite closely, and today, really, I wanted to talk about those manifestos and uh, who is likely to win. Looking at the manifestos and especially looking at Labour's promises for the housing sector, which seem to be very interesting, especially given that there are a couple of things that have come out of the woodworks that are not in the manifesto. The couple of things that have come up as a surprise with Labour, at least, is definitely the end of bidding wars, and that's going to be interesting. So I'm just going to bring this up. So I'm going to bring this up in terms of what those promises are. And let's bring this. So this is a good article that I came across. And this is from a news agent. And Labour's party plans to end bidding wars for letting agents and landlords. The Labour Party have vowed to introduce a law to minimise bidding wars in the private rental sector. So what does this mean and how does this actually work in practice? So there's a few things here. First of all, it has been compared to a rule that was passed in New Zealand in 2021. And how they went about to actually implementing this, it's going to be a challenging one because ultimately, if you have a tenant who has seen the property ad and they know that the competition is really, really fierce, and they want to actually offer more than the actual asking price or guide price, whatever that may be on the advertisement, then how do you stop them? How do you control that? It's more towards encouragement. It's more towards encouragement towards the agent or the landlord, and stop encouragement from that end. But again, how do you prove that? And yeah, that from an agent's perspective, that's going to be very interesting. But the important thing here that I want to show, so the rise of bidding wars in the private sector. In April 2024, it was reported that almost 1 in 5 tenants had not secured a rental property due to the bidding war in the past 2 years. In London, I'm going to say that this is much more fierce. We certainly have had sort of around about like 50 applicants that or 50 people wanted to view a property, and then it was easy to see probably in the last 12 to 24 months 18 people applying for the same property. And this goes on further. I know that this was so according to Cornerstone Tax, Southampton is the worst area for bidding wars, with 28% of renters being forced to partake in one to attempt to secure property. This is followed by Brighton with 27%, London 26%. So there you go. London is definitely up there, and it's interesting to see that Southampton is the worst when it comes to bidding wars. I'm not familiar with the market there, but certainly if it's ahead of London, it's going to be fierce. Anyway, so how does the Labour Party promise to end the bidding wars? Last week, Labour Party Sir Keir Starmer stated Labour can enact new legislation to stop landlords and letting agents from creating sky-high rent within the sector. This would mean that while letting agents and landlords cannot encourage bidding war for a rental property, a renter can choose to bid above the advertised price to secure it. So, I wanted to show you some results from New Zealand, because as I said, New Zealand came across the same thing 2021. They implemented some rules and regulations to end the bidding wars. How does that work out for them? that's something that I have done a bit of research on. So since 2021 and where we are today. So I believe this is the one. So I found this article, and it's interesting to see rental shortage, first home buyers on winning streak. What is happening with New Zealand housing? So this article is from 2024. Obviously, it's been several years since this was implemented to help renters, but it seems that renters are still struggling despite the numerous regulation legislation from New Zealand. And what's even more interesting to see is that even though New Zealand's still struggling and haven't implemented this and many other regulations, I saw in another article that the UK is looking to New Zealand to see what they implement to help renters. That doesn't make quite much sense, because what's the point of looking at what they've implemented if it hasn't worked? And clearly, from based on this article, renters are still struggling. So changes to interest deductibility on residential rental properties and the 90-day eviction law have yet to impact the rental stock. Impression real estate measured rental activity across 1,000 properties, and it seems to be a disaster based on what I see from this. And it echoes, actually, I'm going to show you another article. It reminds me from a rental cap and restriction point of view as well. Now, it doesn't seem that Labour has promised a rental cap as such, from what I can see. I know that the mayor has been pushing, the mayor of London at least, has been pushing for some regulations in London, if I'm not mistaken, also including rental caps. But let's look towards Scotland, because Scotland did go through the rental cap, and there was some impact there that are very interesting when the government obviously intervenes. Now, listen, guys, if any renters are out there watching this video and thinking, oh, there is no empathy towards renters, absolutely 100% there is. But there's got to be regulations, legislations, and things that are actually going to fix the housing crisis, including the rental crisis. And what's clear is that these implementations are not helping either the landlords or the renters. So, Scotland's rent cap disaster, a warning to all landlords and tenants groups everywhere. So, this was published in December 2023, so 6 months ago. News this week that the rent cap in Scotland has led to higher rents will be a story ignored by the likes of Shelter, Generation Rent, and Acorn. So, again, there's got to be implementation and there's got to be solutions to fix the housing crisis. And there seems to be a lot of focus on landlords and how we somehow restrict landlords doing one thing and the other, and in every corner trying to make it more challenging for landlords. And yet it seems to be backfiring on every corner, especially if we look at when the tenant fee ban came in place 2019. What happened? Rents shot up. Why? Because landlords wanted to pass that on to the agents. They couldn't, because agents couldn't charge that fee either. What happened? Rents increased so that landlords can cover those costs. So let's carry on with this. Capping rents at a time when landlords are seeing their overheads increase and profits fall was always going to end this way. Rent caps have never worked anywhere, but we still have loons who don't understand how the private renter sector works. And the story on Property 118 has the man responsible, Patrick Harvey, still insisted that this is the best route, and he is looking at long-term rental controls. Really? It's the best route? Surely the best route would be to build more homes and make it more competitive for landlords so that the rents can actually start to balance out. Until that happens, I don't believe that there's much going to change. I believe that's where we should be focusing on. At the end of the day, if there's more housing stock, there's more people that have more options to buy properties, first-time buyers, because if there's more properties, more competition on the sales market. there's more properties for rental as well, more competition for landlords. How do we get there? It's certainly not going to be just focusing on current landlords, especially the private landlords. Okay, so rent rise being capped at 3%. I mean, I'm not going to drill down on this, but again, this could be a possibility from Labour. We never know. There seems to be, again, things coming out from the woodworks, and that would be something to keep a close eye on. In fact, one thing I wanted to share with you is I recently, just the last few hours actually, was at the Landlord Investment Show here in London. It takes place a couple of times a year, and it's interesting to see the sentiment of landlords. And of course, landlords can be divided in different ways. You have those big portfolio landlords, so landlords who have 20 plus properties. You have that middle end landlords, landlords that have between 11 to 20. And then you have those landlords who have anything between 1 and 4 properties. And that sentiment is going to change depending on what kind of business they have or whether they treat it as a business at all. And it was interesting. A lot of landlords turned up, some negative, some positive, some concerned. Some were there to look at how they went on to exit the market and sell their properties with the tenants in situ and try to minimize as much as possible in terms of costs and finding out whether right now is the right time for them to sell up. A lot of these landlords, of course, have purchased properties in the last 20 years or so. So I have quite a fair amount of capital growth to be able to enjoy from that, taking into account the capital gains tax that they should have to pay on that. Yet there are a lot of landlords as well that I spoke to out there that only just purchased properties in the last 5 years or so. Not much capital growth, and yet they are spooked. They say that they don't want to be in the rental industry anymore, that they feel that they are being bashed in every corner from the government, and that they simply don't want to continue on big owning property and renting property. And of course, all of this has an impact on the amount of stock that's available for renters out there. And I know a lot of people say, renters at least say, well, boo-hoo, if landlords are going to sell up, well, good riddance, and at the end of the day, there's always going to be rental stock. But from where? The government certainly isn't providing this rental stock, so where is it going to come from? So yeah, that's going to be a good thing to keep an eye on. So let's see if there's any questions that I can answer from here. What are the potential benefits and drawbacks of Labour's proposed policy on rental bidding from a landlord perspective? Well, that remains to be seen, because I don't know how they're going to roll this out, Martha. It's going to be interesting. I'm not sure how they're going to regulate this, how they're going to police this, whether they're going to have any leeway if the tenant themselves decides, I want to offer £200 more because I want to secure this property. I know here in London, for example, if we have properties that's worth sort of £2,000, £2,200. I remember last year we launched a property, £2,300, I think it was, and we ended up the landlord ended up achieving something along the lines of 2,600, 2,700, so £400 above the guide price. So when we have that information, Martha, I'll be happy to share that with you. Sorry, that question was from, so there's a question from Anna. Specific measures within Labour housing promises that could help mitigate potential negative impacts on landlords. I guess the best thing I can say to you, which you should have already been doing, is incorporate. Of course, if you have a mortgage on your property as a landlord, you can no longer deduct the interest rate mortgage cost against the rent that you have. There was a really interesting article actually that I saw. I'm not sure whether I can share this, because it was actually a video, but I'm not sure actually I can share this. And it was from Sky News, and it was showing the other end of the coin. And I know that renters, get one end of the stick, and they certainly, it's their home, and if they risk losing their home and so forth. And yet, there are a lot of landlords who are under a lot of pressure, losing their properties or having to work more hours to make ends meet. Because if you're not aware, in terms of mortgage, you could be in a situation whereby your mortgage is £2,500, for example, um, per month. So you pay 2,500 per month for your mortgage, and then your rent money is, for example, £1,500, and you're already losing sort of £1,000 there. And the government, as a business, you don't get to offset that mortgage, 2.5 grand. You actually pay your tax based on that £1,500 rent money, regardless of the other costs. And there is no other business that holds true. It's only on mortgages. So yeah, I've heard people say that that's downright illegal, but that is the nature of the end of Section 24. So great. Okay, thank you, Leslie. Good to see you. Let's jump on to the topic that we were talking about with regards to the sentiment of landlords. So, buy to let, only a third of landlords feel positive about it. So, I know for sure, coming towards around about 8 months ago, so around about the third quarter of last year, landlord sentiments was probably the lowest that I've seen in a long time. And there seems to be a slight shift, especially from the pessimistic landlords. And that does change depending on what type of portfolio the landlords have. So we do have fewer landlords feel negative about their buy-to-let business, according to the latest Land Bay Landlord Survey. The specialist lender surveys typically show optimistic results about the sector. Some 27% of the landlords surveyed this time felt negative about their business, compared to 37% at the end of last year, while 40% of landlords were neutral. Only 33% actually felt positive. So that positive 1/3 highlighting increased or steady demand as reason for their optimism. So, of course, despite all the challenges at the moment, there continues to be a lot of demand for rental properties. And of course, there is a ceiling as to how much that can go up, because although rentals are driven by the market, as much as a lot of people out there feel it's actually driven by agents and by increasing rents or landlords greeting landlords, it's driven by the market. And yet it's also driven by wages. So there's always going to be a ceiling based on those wages that those potential tenants can pay. And of course, if it goes above a certain percentage, I'm not sure how that would even work, to be honest with you. But it's always going to be above inflation for sure, which is one of the things that makes property investment so attractive. So when we look at this, of those between 4 to 10 properties, more felt negative than positive. Actually, let me read. So that positive 1/3 highlight increased steady of demand. The strongest positive sentiment was among those landlords with portfolios of over 20 properties. Of course, these landlords are going to be more strategic. They're going to be more analytical. They're going to take the measures that they need to take in advance very often to make their business work. Is going to be more of a business. So that makes sense that they're going to be more positive, and they can also mitigate more towards the regulation, taxes, and so forth. Now, from the responding HMO landlords, 43% felt positive about their business, with approaching 30% feeling negative. Again, doesn't surprise me. HMO landlords are going to be a little bit more experienced and going to treat it more as a business. I hope you find this helpful so far. If it is being helpful, and we are going to try to do these calls, hopefully with less technical issues every week, so we can update you with everything with regards to the market and the rental industry for landlords, and hopefully for renters as well. So let's see if we have any other questions. Anna, Would be great to have your input on what the government policies or market trends should you suggest investors to monitor to assess the stability and profitability of rental market. This is something I was discussing actually with someone today at the investment show. And I believe it's going to be, I'm a big believer of sticking to what you know, whether it's business or otherwise. When it comes to business, if you follow my channel, you'll know I always say keep to one lane. So if you're familiar with working professionals in urban areas, then 80% of your portfolio should be based on this. Why? Because your process, your systems, but also your personality and your experience is going to be towards this particular target audience. And once you have that experience and once you have those systems in place, everything else is just going to work, like clockwork. And those type of tenants are going to be able to get along with you and you with them and understand them and anticipate things. And that's great to have. Yet, what I'm going to say now is having a mixture of your portfolio to ensure that you minimize risk is definitely going to be sensible, especially in today's world where we are now. What does that look like? Now, again, stick to that 80%. I'm a big believer in the 80% principle. It doesn't have to be exactly 80%, but thereabouts. If it's 70% and the other 30% could be a mixture, for example, of HMOs or student lets. It could be commercial. Commercial works amazing, or a mixture of mixed commercial and residential. So this, of course, means, for example, you have an apartment above the commercial unit and you rent the commercial unit, potentially even converting that commercial unit into a resi if the plans are there and you're able to convert it. Those type of mixtures would be sensible for you to have to answer your question, Anna, in terms of government policy and market trends that I would suggest as an investor. I certainly wouldn't be just sitting on one type of portfolio right now. I hope that helps, and keep following our channel so we can continue to see what kind of trends that may be. Danny, do you think that there are any potential loopholes in Labour's plan that landlords should be aware of? The the challenge is that the game could probably change somewhat, because remember, since 2019 they've been feeding us, the government, not Labour specifically, the government's been feeding us about this reform, and it's not happened. And at this point, this is going to bring me to my next point, which is, at this point, landlords just want the reforms to be done to a degree, whatever that looks like. Just get it passed and get it done so we know where we are. I spoke to a lot of landlords right before the snap election, and they were actually pleased that finally the rental reform was going to take place, because now they can have some clarity. And then suddenly, wham, the renters reform bill is dead. And that disappointed a lot of landlords instead of pleasing them, because we're back to square one. And now, if Labour comes into government, which is very likely based on the stats that I've been looking at, it could completely change. So that brings me, actually, let's jump on. So, was it Martha? Martha, with regards to your question with regards to the loopholes, um, I, I, I'm not sure whether the word loophole would be the best wording, for me at least, but certainly ways to navigate around the actual rules, or navigate around the regulations that may be put in place. And until we know what regulations Labour is going to put in place, uh, and how it's going to be done, I don't have an answer for that, to be quite frank. But one thing I did want to share with you was, uh, 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 I can't find it. But in the meantime, let's jump on to elaborate on your question, Martha. let's look at what those manifestos are, and then we can perhaps, if any, look at how we can navigate any of them. I'm going to ignore the Conservative Party manifesto, because we already knew what that is, what that looks like. If they win, which is very unlikely, we already know what that renters reform looks like. And if they were to proceed with it, they'd probably pick up where they left off. So I'm going to ignore the Conservative Party. So when it looks at the Labour Party also wishes to take further steps to ban new leasehold flats and ensure common hold is the default tenure. It seemed that that Conservatives were kind of on the middle ground when it comes to leasehold, not going as far as saying we're going to abolish the whole thing. Labour Party seems to be much more aggressive when it comes to leasehold, saying actually they would just scrap the entire system. How that would look like, I'm not sure, but this is certainly a clue, if you could see my screen, that we're going to move more towards common hold as a default, as opposed to a leasehold, which at the moment isn't quite typical to see. There are only a few properties that are actually common hold, so it could become the norm, which I guess for landlords probably be a good thing, and certainly for leaseholders. I mean, let's face it, there are a lot of freeholders that are absent freeholders who charge an enormous amount of money for service charges, and there is a lack of transparency, and there needs to be an end to that. It's just not fit for purpose, and especially in today's world, it just doesn't work. Would there be an abolishment completely of leasehold? Of course not. I mean, how would that even work as well? But common hold seems to be the way to go, and what Labour is pushing for. So a package of law commission proposal will be introduced if Labour are elected. These proposals will focus on leasehold enfranchisement, right to manage, and a common hold. And I think I jumped a few steps there. Okay, so let's go back to Labour Party. So Labour had previously shared their significant doubts around the version of the renters reform bill. The party plan will legislate where the Conservatives have failed. Especially one of the big ones is Section 21. So it seems what they won't do is delay abolishing Section 21, which is probably the biggest change in the renters reform bill proposed by Labour. And let me stop sharing this. It's probably the biggest change proposed by Labour. And the difference there, I think, is that the Conservative, I say quite sensibly, wanted to delay it until the courts were fit for purpose. I believe Labour have said, previously at least, that they will abolish it within 100 days of coming into power. I think that's going to be rather irresponsible, because if the courts are not able to manage and handle what they have now, God knows how they're going to do that once they abolish Section 21. Should this be a big challenge for landlords? I don't think so. I mean, landlords, especially those who are treating this as a business, it is not an aspirational property. It is a functional property, meaning that you're not looking to get the property back for your purposes. And even if you did want to do that, Section 8 will allow that for that to happen. So you don't really need Section 21 to be able to get the property back for your purposes, even for your family members. And if you wanted to sell the property, um, you could do that as well under Section 8 with the new regulations, at least as proposed from the Conservative Party. So quite a few things there. There will be some challenges, however, based on how do you go about increasing your rent if Labour does introduce some rent controls. And if you want to sell your property, and your property, you already had a discount for your current tenant, and the mortgage, if you want to remortgage or if you want to sell the property, and the rental property does not reflect a good rental income, but it's simply because you've given that renter a great offer for the last couple of years, and then suddenly you want to sell the property or want to remortgage, and now you need to get rental market price. but you may not be able to do that if there is some type of control. I hope that makes sense. So, going back to the manifestos, Labour. There are plenty of vocal proponents. So let's look at this. This was introducing rent controls, as we just discussed. So if Labour does come in with this, there are plenty of vocal proponents of rent controls. And Labour Party, including Sadiq Khan, which is the one that's been pushing the most. And now he's also pushing with regards to short lets and how that's going to be monitored. I think those are going to be the biggest uh, implementation from Labour, honestly, from what I see. Everything else is kind of a version of the previous rental reform from the Conservative. But I think where it massively is going to change is going to be based on whether there are going to be an element of rent controls, whether there is going to be an end to that bidding wars, and also what kinds of implementation is going to be in there for short let and the control around that. So going back to Sadiq Khan and Manchester Mayor Andy Burnham. However, the party also includes some detractors, such as Subhana Mahmood, a senior MP and Labour's campaign manager. They will also empower renters to challenge unreasonable rents increases, although it's not mentioned how in their manifesto. Now, of course, there's going to be MPs who are landlords as well. And this goes for multiple parties. A lot of people focus on the Conservative. Hey, a lot of Conservative MPs are landlords. And however, I'm sure Labour MPs are also landlords. What quantity it is, I'm not sure. But I am curious from your end, if you're watching this, what is your opinion on MPs being able to vote and make changes and influence the housing market who are landlords? Should they be allowed to, or should they be excluded completely if they're a landlord? Obviously, they're going to be biased. Leave me a comment below. I always love to hear your feedback. I always give my opinion based on the data that I see. So what else do we have here based on the Labour Party? So boosting housing supply. I mean, we always have promises from the government about boosting housing supply, and I believe this is where the energy and the focus and discussion should be focused on, as opposed to looking at landlords. Yes, there are things that needs to be fixed in the rental market, and to be honest with you, those professional landlords and most agents out there welcome it. Let's bring in high standards for the rental market. I think it's a great thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. And because there is a very small percentages in the minority of landlords that are rogue landlords that don't follow the rules, don't want standards to be increased. And I don't believe that's right. And we need to be able to filter out those landlords and start having a better name in the industry for both landlords and agents. So boosting supply. So in the Labour Party manifesto, they have created a goal of 1.5 million new homes as part of the Kickstart Economic Growth Mission. How they're going to do that? I honestly, I do not know. Um, I remember that, if I'm not mistaken, both the Conservative and the Labour Party have always given some type of target which is never met. So the party wishes to put local authorities and communities at the heart of the house building in the area for both Labour and Conservative parties. They will be focused on utilising brownfield area and developing previously used land wherever possible. I think where the Labour or any government will do well is certainly putting the right people and resources in place when it comes to um, applications for building and for planning permissions and so forth, so they can speed up the process. I think once that's done, I believe that the housing can be boosted much more quicker than what we've had in recent times. Let's go back to Labour Party. What's this regards housing standards? Housing standards again. Welcome, absolutely welcome housing standards. It's something sometimes I've seen some very poor properties, although in London, most are actually quite up to date. So this law was originally introduced in the social sector in 2023, following 1-year-old passing away. Yep. So yeah. So however, it's just passing away. Of course, this was big in the media, and so it should be. Certainly a tragedy, and something that it should not happen. Um, and I say, bring it on. Bring it on. I believe renters should be protected, and those landlords, those rogue landlords, should really be put in their place or get out. So regulating holiday homes. So this is the big part where I believe the Labour Party is going to be pushing, especially in London. This has the same aim as the measures that the Conservative government is suggesting to help support tourist areas hard hit by the influx of holiday homes. However, there is no mention of short lets within their manifesto, so it's unclear how it's going to happen. But if it's up to Sadiq Khan, it's definitely going to happen one way or the other. Let's look at some questions. We are running out of time now. So, what role do the government policies play in shaping the sentiments reported by RICS members? I'm not exactly sure about that, Leslie. I'd have to look at the policies, and especially the sentiments reported by RICS. So let me come back round to you on that one. So sorry if I'm repeating myself. This is Anna. But how could Labour's plan to end rental bidding wars affect the landlord and the tenant relationship? Well, the bidding war will start at the very beginning of that relationship, Anna. So let's not forget that this bidding war that we're talking about is once you put a property ad onto the market, what they are saying is if you put a property on for £2,000, then it should rent for that £2,000. So if you have 10 people who apply for that property, you're not going to go back to each one of them and say, listen, guys, we're now going to the best and final because we have 10 applications. So you should come and submit a higher bid, and we're going to go with the higher bid. So what they want to do is put an end to that. And this already happens in a lot of countries. I know that my US colleagues, agents obviously the states in the US, each state have their own legislation, their own laws. But certainly in most of the states out there, the price that you put in is the price that you must rent at. You cannot rent for a dime more than that. That's why when a lot of US people come to the UK and they, see a property price and they put an application through and agents go back to them and say, this is going to best and final, they're a bit confused. What do you mean? But this is the rental price. It's very clear on the ad. And then the agent has to go to explain, yes, that's the price, but there is so much demand for it that the price is going to go up. And it takes them a minute or two to comprehend that because, of course, it's illegal to do that in the US. Does this now mean that rental prices are going to increase? Because now landlords are going to be thinking, well, actually, I don't want to underprice my property, and agents as well. We don't want to underprice property for landlords. And so, if we're unsure the limit that we can achieve on this, we're going to go sky high. That could probably be an impossibility and an impact, like everything. As I said, tenant fee ban had an impact. Section 24 had an impact. Everything the government has, there's always going to be a cause and an effect. That's just the way things work. Um, so just to be just a bit unclear, based on these proposed policies and market sentiment, do you anticipate challenges for landlords in finding tenants? Straight answer, no. No, because there is a shortage of rental properties out there. Demand is at all-time high. Um, Obviously, it has balanced out in comparison to an extent, in comparison to a year and 2 years ago, but these were abnormal markets. I mean, this was like, as I said before, where 50 people wanted to view a property, 20 people put in an application. Now, we're not seeing that type of demand right now, but certainly if we compare it to pre-pandemic market, the demand is still up, and properties coming onto the market is down. So there is still an imbalance between supply and demand, and as long as that is there, and it will continue to be there, at least for the foreseeable future, until there is enough housing stock, and there isn't. To answer your question, Martha, no, I don't see any challenges finding tenants. And of course, everything's relevant depending on where your property is located. But it seems that most part of the UK urban areas seems to be around about the same type of market. A lot of demand. Okay, Danny, will be helpful. Okay, I hope policymakers consider all sides when implementing new housing regulations. For sure, one would think so, Anna. And yet, what we do know from Labour is they are definitely going to be more tenant friendly. That's just the fact. And there aren't any like massive kind of surprises yet from Labour, with the exception of um, the rent, the bidding, an end to the bidding wars. But it will be interesting to see what comes out from the woodworks. So getting a thumbs up, I believe, on the live chat. And so before we wrap up, we have probably around about 10 minutes together. I did want to share with you. Actually, I'm not sure whether we've wrapped up on the Labour Party manifesto. So we did talk about the short lets, regulating the short lets, and leasehold and freeholds. I think we touched upon that about um, the Labour Party wanted to bring that to an end. And we did look at very briefly the mayor demands licensing schemes to prevent short-term lets damaging the houses. More than 80,000 property listed for short-term let in the capital. Sadiq calls for ministers to help him bring accountability and transparency to the sector. Huge number of homes lost to short-term lets is exacerbating London housing crisis by pushing up rents. Now, the Conservative actually had put something in place um, for the short lets. I believe this was done in the spring budget, and this was bringing an end to the tax relief on the short-term rental properties. So a lot of landlords had decided to go to a short term, not only because it's so attractive in terms of the rental income it brings, but also it had the tax relief which the long let didn't provide. So they were having kind of that it was twofold: relief on tax, more rent, why not? It's just a no-brainer, right? That did come to an end, and I believe that was to try and curve landlords to come back onto the long let. So you're not getting the relief on short let, you're not getting the relief on long let. Why not just come back to the long let? But let's not forget that if you incorporate, you're going to get that benefit regardless on whether you're on either side of that industry. So the mayor, London, Sadiq Khan, is calling for government to help protect London's housing supply from being disseminated by short-term lets. The rapid growth in short-term rent in London in recent years, fueled by online platforms such as Airbnb. So certainly it is attractive to landlords, and that is a fact. How they're going to balance that out, not sure. But I know that the conservatives certainly had their own ideas. So I believe that we have come full circle because we talked about the renters reform, and I touched on this very briefly about the renters reform bill. Right now, what landlords want is just transparency. Get it, the job done. Just get it passed so we know where we stand. That's what landlords are saying. We want to know where we stand. We've had 5 years of this, if I'm not mistaken. In 2019, this was first announced in the Queen's speech. That there was going to be a renter reform. I believe it was part of the manifesto of the Conservative. It started, getting some type of traction during the pandemic, but then it slowed down. And it's been 5 years of this. Landlords are asking, let's just have it and let's have the transparency. Let's read a little bit about this. This is from the National Residential Landlords Association. They're demanding that new government elected tomorrow brings back the Renters Reform Bill as a matter of urgency. They're actually asking for this. They are begging. I mean, in what situation do landlords beg for a renters reform? They're almost begging for this to just get it be done, over and done with. So the statement, which is endorsed by the leaders Romans Group letting agency chain, build to rent giant Granger, and the British Property Federation, underlines how crucial it is for the newly elected administration to make reform of the rental market a key priority following the vote. A statement from NRLA says, follows widespread campaign by the NRLA in the run up to the general election, where we have sought to highlight issues which we feel the UK's major political parties must take into account. Renters, landlords, and letting agents have faced 5 years of uncertainty over plans to end Section 21, the no-fault repossessions, with all the main parties manifestly committed to delivering them. So hopefully the government hears both the renters and also landlords' request to put this as a priority, and um, let's get some clarity. I want to look at something here. Labour Party vowed to rent bidding wars. Okay, yeah, so this was part of the rental bidding wars promise, as announced by Sky. So, guys, thank you very much for those who joined. I hope you find this helpful. I promise to make sure that we can be better equipped with any technical issues. We were a few minutes late today and a little bit of hiccups, but we aim to be better every time. Again, leave us comments below. Subscribe to the channel because we will bring you updates as this ever evolving and changing industry. And God bless. Thank you so much. Have a good evening. Thank you.